Good Tuesday evening, sports viewers. Eric DeCam, Logan DeRung's Double D Sports Show. That's right, we're coming to you tonight on a Tuesday evening instead of our usually Monday night evening. Changing it up a little bit so we can talk a little Monday Night Football for you after last night's game, and I think this is going to kind of be our normal routine from now on. So let's get right into it. Lots to talk about in the NFL this week. A lot of controversy around the league with a bunch of teams on quarterback situations. Ndamukong Suh in Detroit getting a lot of attention today, this week after his little incident with Matt Schaub in their game on Thanksgiving. And we'll recap Sunday night's game and Monday night's game. So I think that's where we're going to start, is recapping Sunday night's game. Giants versus the Packers. Huge blowout win for the Giants. Wasn't expecting to see this big of a win for the Giants, especially playing the always high-powered offense team of the Green Bay Packers, but a big win, I think 38-10 win for the Giants. What do you take from that? What do you take from that win for the Giants?
This is just New York Giant football. We see it every week. I said that, or every year, excuse me. I said that I would be very hard to keep the Giants out of the top 10 power rankings in the NFL, and then once they make the playoffs, we know that they can make a run. And New York does this year in and year out. We saw them 2 years ago have a big struggle and ended up losing, and we know the miracle kick return by Deshaun Jackson. And then we also saw last year they turned it around and actually made the playoffs and beat Green Bay on their way to a Super Bowl. Thought it was interesting that the Green Bay Packers and Giants have played 3 times in less than a year, and Green Bay took them in the regular season in an overtime loss. That's when the Packers last season had that perfect record, before they lost it at Kansas City. But we saw the Giants come out and take them in the playoffs and take them now, and New York is establishing themselves, you have to think, as, if not the premier, one of the premier teams in the NFC, especially as the season goes on.
You're right, and they did the same, like you said, they did the same thing last year where they struggled in November and then got hot right when it matters. And you know, Eli Manning had a good game, 249 for 3 TDs. Brown, 13 carries, 64 yards, 1 TD. And Akeem Nicks had a pretty decent game for a receiver with 5 receptions, 77 yards, and 1 TD. They dominated this game from the beginning. I think the biggest thing was the Giants' defense. They got a lot of sacks. You know, they ended up with a total of 5 sacks, I believe, and that's pretty unusual for Rodgers to get sacked that many times. But you know, that's their weak point right now, I think, for the Packers, is their offensive line, their inconsistency in offensive line.
The offensive line is absolutely the weak point for Green Bay, and we see that. You know, we saw that against Seattle. You know, you say what you want, say what you will about the Packers in that Seattle game. They should have won the game. The bad call. Bottom line is they lost the game. You know, there is no doubt that they put up 12 points. Okay, so when then we look at the Giants, they put up 10 points. San Francisco, they had scored a late touchdown to go from 30 to 15 to 30 to 22. But these 3 losses, the 3 huge losses, you know, the loss to Indianapolis, they scored points. They scored 27 points. But these 3 losses, these teams really got after Aaron Rodgers. If teams find a way to pressure Aaron Rodgers, the Packers are very vulnerable. Now, when he has time to sit back there and pocket and pick teams apart, as he did in games such as St. Louis, such as Houston, that huge Sunday night win in their first game against Chicago, Aaron Rodgers actually came out and was pretty impressive with 219 yards and a touchdown against a good Chicago Bears defense. If you don't pressure him and give him time, he will dismantle you. That's why going into this week, he was a front runner for the MVP. He probably took a step backwards just because they got blown out so bad, but there's definitely ground to be made up for Aaron Rodgers just because of this defeat. And not that Aaron Rodgers is looking at it as an MVP race. He wants his team to win a championship, but teams are seeing this. Hey, we get pressure on Aaron Rodgers, we can beat the Packers.
Right, and that's, I heard Colin Cowherd say today on his radio show that Aaron Rodgers is the glue, the bondo, the stucco holding this team together right now. He's the only reason they're viable. Without Aaron Rodgers, if you have a mediocre quarterback in that position, I think they're a bottom tier team.
Just because of the offensive line, absolutely. He's 100% correct on that. The only argument I'll have with that is, you know, there's a lot of teams that are hung together and glued by a quarterback. You know, you really question where Denver would be without Peyton Manning.
Right.
You question where New England will be without Tom Brady. New Orleans, look at the struggles they're having in New Orleans without Drew Brees. Talk about another team on the rise, the Washington Redskins. Where would they be without Robert Griffin III? Well, they'd be cellar dwellers like they were last year.
Well, yeah,
now they're second place in that division, and that's what we look at as a quarterback that makes the team. But he is very right that Aaron Rodgers may be the most important of all these teams just because of that offensive line. He's under pressure even when he's good.
Right, and that's that's just it. This is such a quarterback-driven league that if you want to be a good team, you need to have a good quarterback. And you look at the teams that are there every year; they're viable at that, or they're set at that quarterback position. And that's the number one key to having a good team. And brings up a little bit of point that we kind of talked about over the weekend. We were kind of Facebooking back and forth to each other. My Vikings got a pretty good butt whooping by the Chicago Bears, and Jay Cutler came out, and I'm just not a Jay Cutler fan. It's just the way he carries himself. It's just a personal thing. I'm not saying he's not a good quarterback, but the discussion we had was, I said I would take, there's 15 quarterbacks I would take before Jay Cutler. And we kind of got into a little discussion on that, and you disagreed with me on probably the last 5 that I had on my list. But it just shows you, I mean, Cutler had a great game, and you could see a 180-degree turnaround from the week before when they had Jason Campbell playing to this week, and the stuff Jay Cutler just created. So just another point I'm trying to prove on how important a good quarterback is.
Absolutely. We look at the Chicago Bears. They're an interesting team. Colin might want to take a look at the Bears because this team might be one that is more reliant on their quarterback. I think we see that. They do have a tremendous defense, but we saw when they go to San Francisco, they will not win the NFC without Jay Cutler, period.
Right.
They may not win it with him, but without him, they're pretty much guaranteed to not win the NFC. So we do see that the NFC, these teams are so reliant on their quarterback. I think the teams, that's why we see the Giants and the Patriots in the Super Bowl. Yes, their quarterback is a huge part, but they do have systems. Okay, they have systems that work, and that's the teams that win. Now, we saw Aaron Rodgers win a Super Bowl. Okay, we've seen Drew Brees win a Super Bowl. But these teams are built around these guys, not necessarily having these guys plugged in. The Patriots went 10-6 with Matt Castle. Look what Matt Castle's doing in Kansas City right now.
Right.
Okay, he's not even starting anymore.
Right.
So to say that the teams need Tom Brady, the Patriots need Tom Brady, they probably do, but they can be a successful team without him.
Right. And we'll get more into the quarterback thing a little bit later. We'll talk about the quarterback situations as we have a few teams picked out, and I got a little bit to say about the situation in San Francisco. But let's touch a little bit on last night's game. Carolina and Philly, battle of last place teams basically on Monday Night Football. And as a football fan, you really don't get too excited when you see Panthers and Eagles 2-8 versus 3-7.
Now they're both 3-8.
Now they're both 3-8.
Yep.
But it ended up to be a pretty good game. Philly held their own. I took Philly. I thought Philly would come out and Cam Newton would show up as his usual selfish playing self and not perform. But Cam Newton had a good game, 306 yards, 2 TDs. I believe he ran in one. And, Carolina came away with the win. A lot of turmoil in Philly. The first 2 plays out, Cam Newton throws a 24-yard touchdown pass and then a 36-yard touchdown pass. And these guys were, wide open is an understatement. These guys were wide open.
Yep.
And, there's got to be something done in Philly. I don't think we'll see it this year, but, next year for sure. What did you take away from the game?
We watched the game actually. Cam threw for 2 scores and ran for 2 more.
Oh, okay.
In the game. Philadelphia has struggled all season long, and I knew they would. I thought they would coming into the year. I didn't know it'd be this bad. They're a 3-8 team. They have talent on this team, and that's why I think ultimately it comes down to coaching. And that's a sad deal. Andy Reid will have a job. It's not like this is his last stint. This is the last couple of years have really been his only real bad years, and that's when he's had the most hype to be good.
Mm-hmm.
But the bottom line is, what I want to point out that I don't know if it is not, that maybe coaching isn't the issue, is, Andy Reid isn't out there on the field. He's not the one out there fumbling the ball. 3 fumbles.
Yeah.
3 fumbles.
Yep.
And Philly had the ball around midfield, down by 8. Carolina just missed a extra point to keep it an 8-point game. Philly has a chance to go down and score 4 or 5 minutes left. They fumble the football. This is right after they fumbled the drive before. They just can't hold on to the football. They can't take care of the football. And that's another reason at the time of possession, 35 minutes and 12 seconds to 24-48 in favor of the Panthers. That will win you football games.
Yep.
That will win you football games. And these guys just have to find a way to hold on to the ball, to take care of the ball on offense, because their defense really is struggling, but gosh, when you're on the field 3/4 of the game, it makes it hard.
Yeah, and Philly actually, they had a good rushing attack this week. Their rookie running back, who was Bryce Brown, an absolute nothing in college. I think he had a couple different stints with a couple different universities before he finally ended up quitting. And I think, if I remember right from last night's
Kansas State
game,
he was at Kansas State about 4 weeks into the season last year and quit. Worked out, got in the supplemental draft, and ended up going to the Eagles.
But he had a breakout game last night. He had 19 carries for 178 yards. But the big thing you touched on was fumbles. A young runner, a rookie runner, obviously, needs to learn how to tuck that ball away, put it away, protect that ball. Gruden was preaching on it last night. So, I think there's upside for the Philadelphia Eagles, but it's just not this year.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of turnaround at that. Andy Reid's going to be gone. More than likely, Michael Vick will be gone. They're going to have to start developing a system around Nick Foles, who I think can be a good quarterback. But like you said, they got a lot of talent on that team. I think they're trying to clear up some cap space right now because they released Jason Babin today. You made the comment earlier today when we were talking about a one-year wonder, or a one-hit one-year wonder. He had roughly about 18 sacks last year, or 15 sacks this year, and he's at 5.5 this year. So obviously not the year they were expecting from him, but I think he's a good player, and I think he'll land somewhere strong. But be expecting a lot of turnaround on the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, I think the only ones that really have a safe job are their 2 star receivers, Deshaun Jackson and Jeremy Maclin, and then also LaShawn McCoy at the running back position.
Well, last night, that performance, you could make an argument there that his job isn't really safe. Bryce Brown.
We're going to get to that a little bit later. I got a point to make on that in the quarterback controversy, but my point is, Bryce Brown has one big performance. You have to take into consideration this is one game.
Right.
If he puts a string together and develops into a great running back, then they got a little more depth there. But right now, LaShawn McCoy, it's still his job once he comes back from injury. The thing is, I just feel like, just like you said, there's going to be a lot of turnover in that city. There's going to be a lot of guys leaving and a lot of new guys coming in, and it starts with the coaching staff. We could possibly see, more than likely we'll see, a complete shelling of their whole entire coaching staff and bring in everyone new. And that'll be really interesting. First of all, to see who they get, and secondly, to see who they bring with them.
Well, the thing, to touch on that a little bit, it's not certain. I'm not reading this off of ESPN. I'm just purely speculation. There's some guys out there, coaches out there, former coaches doing TV that might be getting a little antsy to get back on that field, get back underneath that headset. John Gruden, Bill Belichick,
Brian Billick.
Brian Billick, and the Steelers' old coach. I'm drawing a blank right now. Bill Cowher. Yeah, those are 3 big-name coaches that have had success in the NFL that I think, with the right offer and the right situation, they might come back. You're looking at 2 high media teams with the Philadelphia Eagles and the Dallas Cowboys, maybe looking for new coaches. Philadelphia for sure. Dallas maybe, depending on how the playoff race runs. But those are 2 big time spots that might need to be filled.
It's going to be an interesting offseason, to say the least.
Well, let's move into that quarterback controversy we were talking about a little bit earlier. Let's start off with the biggest one out of all of them, the San Francisco 49ers. Colin Kaepernick came out and played against the New Orleans Saints and had a pretty good game. He went into probably one of the toughest places to play in the Superdome and came out with a win. Now, as you touched on earlier, it's a system, and he's got a lot of talent around him in San Francisco.
Yep.
But just the poise that Colin Kaepernick had, I thought was pretty impressive. And, supposedly, middle of the week, tomorrow, which would be middle of the week, Harbaugh's going to come out and say who his starter is going to be for this next week. I feel bad for Alex Smith because I think he's a great quarterback, but I think Kaepernick's got the start next week.
It's going to be interesting. He obviously started against the Bears and just lit the world on fire. There's no doubt about it. He's came out against Chicago and played great football. You know, he was 16 or 23, 243 yards, threw 2 touchdowns, didn't turn the ball over. You know, last week he's 16 completions again, 25 attempts, over 200 yards, a touchdown, 1 interception, but you live with that. The way he went in there and handled himself is a huge thing. Colin Kaepernick gives the San Francisco 49ers something they don't have with Alex Smith, and that's a little more mobility. The guy can get around a little bit more.
No sacks in the game against New Orleans.
No sacks, and he moves around in the pocket. He's not afraid to tuck the ball and run. He's smart getting down, getting out of bounds, whatever the case may be. Colin Kaepernick is a good young quarterback, okay, but it just worries me to think that this guy is a Super Bowl caliber quarterback. Can this guy go into a game against Eli Manning, Aaron Rodgers, okay, and beat these teams? Then when he makes the Super Bowl, can he go into the game against Peyton Manning, against Tom Brady, against Ben Roethlisberger? Can he play against these guys? I don't know. You know, you look at that kind of twofold, and he's not actually playing against those guys, but the fact that they're on the other sideline, that is going through his head.
Right. You know, you brought up Ben Roethlisberger. Good point. Mike Golick made today on the Mike and Mike in the Morning show is Greenberg touched on, can a guy completing 15 to 16 passes a game win you a Super Bowl? And Golick said, well, look at Roethlisberger. His first year starting quarterback, that was basically all he did. He went like 13 for 15 or 15 for 20 and threw for 2 or 3 TDs, and that won him a Super Bowl.
Yep.
I think with the team that the 49ers got, the defense is the big thing. Colin Kaepernick's not going to be, I don't think, as much pressure to put points on the board as he would be if their defense wasn't as strong as they are.
That's absolutely right. The other thing you have to look at, too, is can he take care of the football? If he takes care of the football, you know, we saw Alex Smith's 13 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. That's relatively a pretty good ratio, almost 3 touchdowns to 1 interception.
Right.
You know, and Colin Kaepernick, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. If he can continue at that rate, he does give them a better chance just because of his mobility, his ability to move around and make plays.
Yep.
But if he turns the ball over at a 2-to-1 rate or a 1.5-to-1 rate, then you're looking at it and kind of thinking, well, maybe we do go with Alex Smith just because Alex Smith has done a good job taking care of the football for the 49ers.
But does that mess with the psyche? I mean, so we got 5 weeks left. Say Kaepernick comes out next week and has a mediocre game, maybe 2 TDs, 1 pick, and maybe a fumble. And then the next week he comes out and he's just terrible. He throws, you know, no touchdowns, 2 picks, and 2 fumbles.
Right.
You know, then you're thinking, okay, well now let's pull him out and throw Alex Smith back in there.
It's going to mess with the team, but I think the San Francisco 49ers believe in Jim Harbaugh enough. If he says, hey, there's no quarterback controversy, the team picks up on that, they feed on that. It doesn't matter what the media says.
Right.
Okay, this is one team that I think has that ability. A lot of teams don't. You know, look at the New York Jets. We're going to talk about them next. This team must, you know, they're probably the most scrutinized, talked about football team in the league, but they are the most bothered by that scrutiny. They let that get to them and let them affect them on the field. We saw it 59 to 19, whatever the score was. You know, a lot to a little in New York, at home against the Patriots. So I think the 49ers will be okay. I think Jim Harbaugh will make the right decision. And what they have to know is that no matter what the sport is, whatever the decision the coach makes is the right decision, and they need to play with it. I think they will.
That's a very good point, and I agree with you totally on that one. As Jim Harbaugh is just, you know, he's the type of coach that they listen to him, they buy into him, they love Jim Harbaugh as a coach. His passion for the game, the way he handles himself, and the way he handles his team, it's totally opposite in New York.
Yep.
I mean, man, I'm just drawing blanks with names today.
Rex
Ryan, thank you. Apologize for that. Rex Ryan is just, all he is about show. He doesn't care. That's all he is he's about show. He doesn't. He probably cares about winning his games, but it doesn't show on the field. And like you said, the quarterback controversy with Tebow and Sanchez in New York has absolutely destroyed that team. I mean, I don't know if any of you were watching ESPN this week, but I mean, Fireman Ed, the heart and soul of the Jets fan base, calling it quits. And the reason is because of how much controversy there is between the fans and the media on this Tebow Sanchez thing.
Fans on the coach, fans on the team, fans on the players, fans with fans. I mean, we're talking about a controversy that really, you know what, does Tim Tebow give the Jets a better chance to win? I don't know if I can say one way or the other, but gosh darn Rex Ryan, why not give him a chance? Throw him out there and see what happens. Rodney Harrison said at halftime, Rex Ryan has to put Tim Tebow in at halftime. He has to spark this team somehow. They lose a game 49-19. They had a chance to put him in, see what happens.
Yep.
Why not?
Yep.
Finish out the rest of the year with Tim Tebow. Leave Mark Sanchez out there if you're worried about it. He's gonna, you could have an injury. You never know. Maybe you hit lightning in a bottle with Tebow. You run the table, go 8-8, and push it. Find the playoffs like Denver did it last year.
Exactly.
I just don't know if it's the right decision to have Mark Sanchez. This is another team we could see complete turnaround next year. We may see a coaching change. We may not. But I would be very, very hard to believe, hard to convince me that Tim Tebow will be on this team. And Mark Sanchez may not be on this team. Who knows?
I touched on it, I think, our first week here, or maybe it was the second week with you guys. And, with Reed and Vic being out of Philly, I see Vic going to New York. They're gonna drop Sanchez, they're gonna drop Tebow, and they're gonna bring in Michael Vick just because it's New York. And
it could very easily happen. It's an interesting story. I think this might even be too big for New York to handle. But if anything isn't too big, this could be a thing that he could go to the New York Jets. It's just all about what they do with coach, what they do with the players.
Yep.
I think if you talk about you go in-house to out-of-house. So they're not going to bring in Michael Vick until they get rid of at least one of them guys, probably both,
right.
and then make a decision. And is Michael Vick a quarterback that's going to come in and play under Rex Ryan? Rex Ryan's more of a smash-mouth type football team, not a spread it out and run side to side. So they may have to make a coaching change in order for that to happen.
That's true. Moving on to the Jacksonville Jaguars. They've had a little bit of quarterback changes, and that's more based on injury with Blaine Gabbert. He's been injured as of late. But Chad Henne, has stepped up for the Jaguars and two straight wins.
They lost.
He had a good showing against Houston. That's a game they should have won, and then they won this last week. And Chad Henne put up good numbers. What does Jacksonville do in that situation? You got a good young rookie quarterback that you drafted, but you got Chad Henne he hasn't really proven himself, but he's done okay where he's been, whether it was with the Jets or in Jacksonville.
Yep, Chad Henne actually was with the Dolphins.
Sorry.
And Blaine Gabbert's in his second year. Chad Henne, that's the thing. His yards, and he's thrown for half as many yards and just about as many touchdowns, and he's thrown almost a third as many passes. So Chad Henne has been a better fit when he's in there, and we don't know, one way or the other if the Jacksonville Jaguars will stick with this veteran or if they'll go with the young quarterback. This is another team that they're quite a few years off from being relevant. They know it. Everybody knows it. I think that we just have to talk about these guys. We got to talk about Blaine Gabbert and Chad Henne, and it's going to be discussed. And Gabbert comes back, he may get his chance. I think long term they want to go with Blaine Gabbert, but right now they're just trying to win games. They don't want this team to have to leave.
Right. Yeah, that's a very good point. With LA building their new stadium and wanting a team there, Jacksonville is definitely one of the potential teams to go there. Unfortunately, my Minnesota Vikings have been thrown in that conversation. I don't think it's going to happen just because Minnesota's building their new stadium next year.
Yep.
But yeah, I think that Jacksonville needs to go with Gabbert. You drafted for him. You're putting your faith in Gabbert, and I think he's the better mechanically wise and maybe even football smart wise. I think Blaine Gabbert can be your quarterback of the future. I think he prepares himself for the game in a good manner that a quarterback should.
Yep.
Let's move into the Seattle Seahawks. Not really a quarterback controversy there, but I just threw him in there simply for the fact of how much money they shelled out for Matt Flynn in free agency last year, and they went with their third-round pick in Russell Wilson as their starting quarterback, and Russell Wilson has absolutely exploded onto the scene in the NFL. Seahawks are sitting in a playoff position right now. A lot of that due to Russell Wilson's play on the field. He's a good young quarterback. A lot of people aren't very happy with his size, but he's got the arm, he's got the smarts, and he's got the talent. And I think they made the right choice there.
He completes passes at a rate of just nearly 64%. He's thrown for over 2,000 yards, 17 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. out of a rookie quarterback. What more could they ask for?
Yeah.
You know, he is the reason that, or a reason that they are 6-5. A huge loss last week that really, you know, we talk about their playoff chances. You know, they are sitting in a playoff spot. We understand that, but losing to the Miami Dolphins, that really could come back to bite them, just because they're 6-5. Tampa Bay's hot. Minnesota dropped the game, but they're still sitting at 5. Dallas and New Orleans both lost. Fortunately for the Seahawks, you know, the Seahawks could be looking at, from the outside looking in, if some more games that have broke the other way. You know, we're going to talk playoffs a little bit later, but yeah, you're definitely right. They gave Matt Flynn a lot of money. Matt Flynn's got a couple starts under his belt where he looked impressive, but do you really expect a change now? Obviously not. Maybe next year. Maybe if Russell Wilson struggles, but as good as he's played now, he's earned his spot. I'd be looking for Seattle to move Matt Flynn in the offseason.
Right, yep. And with the quarterback situations around the league, you know, Matt Flynn could end up somewhere and maybe get a shot at starting. But,
Yep.
you know, Matt Flynn, I think, is you know, your career backup. And he's a good backup. I think he can come in just like he did with under Aaron Rodgers and give you a start when you need it and control a game enough to get you a win. But to be the guy that you rely on for your franchise, I don't think that's him.
Well, 2 seasons ago, the Sunday Night Football game, Matt Flynn comes in for a concussed Aaron Rodgers and beats the New England Patriots. That enables the Packers to make the playoffs and then make a Super Bowl run. Without Matt Flynn, I don't know if they win that game. He's
Right.
probably the only backup in the league that could come in and win that game.
Yep. Yep. A couple other things that we just wanted to touch on in the NFL. A lot of news going around with Ndamukong Suh and his little incident with Matt Schaub on Thanksgiving Day. Since coming into the league, Ndamukong Suh's kind of given himself a bad rep. In college with Nebraska, he was a great player, great defensive player for Nebraska. You really didn't hear much about him off the field, but again, under a system, so to say, in Nebraska, where they kind of keep you pretty well close, or, you know, under the wraps. And you know, now he's in the NFL. He's got a little more freedom. A coach in Schwartz that maybe isn't as strict as other coaches, such as Jim Harbaugh or Bill Belichick. You know, what's your take on Ndamukong Suh?
Ndamukong Suh, first of all, start off, he's a great player and he is a great individual off the field. He has a lot of charity work. He makes a meaning, you know, makes a point to go out and do these things to help the community wherever he's at. On the field, it's a completely different situation. You know, we saw him this week, today as well. He got cited for traffic for speeding. You know, that's something that every American does, and that's nothing to hold against the guy. But we look at it, you know, this guy has had a lot of history on the field. We know about the kick play last year when he kicked Aaron Rodgers, or kicked a deep offensive lineman. You know, all that stuff adding up, that is one reason that Ndamukong Suh is being looked at with this play where he got Matt Schaub between the legs. I think everyone's seen it. It's his nature that they think everyone's going to think he did it. Watching it, I don't see intent. I just do not see him intentionally do this. But with his history, that's what's going to get him in trouble. Now, I believe he was suspended.
I don't think he got suspended.
Did not get suspended.
They're talking about a fine right now. I don't think they've issued him one yet.
He missed the suspension, but it's a possibility that he will get fined. You know, is that right or is that wrong? I don't know. You know, that's kind of how our country is built, is that, hey, it doesn't matter if you really did it. If people think you did it, that's almost enough to make you guilty, especially when it's in things like the football and baseball and basketball. We see it more in you know, performance-enhancing drug use. But with this thing, you know, we have video of it. It doesn't, just to me, it just doesn't look that intentional. But once again, we have Ndamukong Suh to where he has this history, has this I almost want to say reputation about him that make me wonder maybe it was done intentionally. And Ndamukong Suh, once again, great player, great person off the field. You know, he plays this, they call it dirty. And Ndamukong Suh, that's just how he plays football. And you say what you want. If this was happening 20, 25 years ago, we wouldn't be talking about it. This stuff happened all the time.
Right.
It's just that the game has evolved, and some of the players have not, and I think that's the big deal here.
Well, yeah, and I just kind of want to compare Ndamukong Suh to a guy that, if you know your history of the NFL, Lyle Alzado, I think he played for the Broncos for a little while, and he played for the Raiders. And Dominic Sue's kind of compared to him, just a dirty player. But like you said, back then it was, you didn't know about it because of the way the media was, and games weren't live like they are now, and you didn't have them in HD, and you didn't have all the camera angles.
And you had guys like Jack Tatum and guys like Lawrence Taylor. All these guys, that's just how they played. They went out there literally trying to inflict harm on the other team. And now we got coaches that are being taught to teach. Coaches are being taught to coach players to basically not injure the other team. And you don't ever, as a coach, I would never tell one of my players, to go out there to physically inflict injury. But if that happens, it's part of the game. You're still hitting guys as hard as you can, and you're still going 110% because they're going to go that hard on you. And it's just interesting that the defense, and I think that's why we're seeing lack of defensive production in the NFL now, because these teams are so hesitant to make all these big hard-hitting plays because they know the fines and suspensions that come along paired with them.
Right. And I kind of just want to play devil's advocate here on Ndamukong Suh. At first glance, it didn't look intentional to me, but if you watch it, if you watch it enough and you kind of maybe slow it down a little bit, you almost kind of see a hesitation in his leg and then a change of direction, and he's looking back with his head. I'm not saying it's intentional, but the thought is there. And like you said, because of the reputation of Ndamukong Suh on the field, and not until this year has he really had off-the-field problems with the multiple citations in the last 12 months and just the way those citations were handled. One report I read was, he was reckless driving and he hit a car and just kept driving, hit a parked car. He's had a lot of incidences where he's been driving and hit parked cars and then fled the scene. And just this one that I read about, and I remember hearing about on ESPN radio, was the cop followed him to the stadium, and then when the cop got out of the car, the report by the officer, I'm assuming, was that Ndamukong Suh told him, it'd be in your best interest to get back in your car and leave. A lot of speculation there, I know, but it doesn't help the matters of Ndamukong Suh. I agree. I think he's an outstanding, maybe outstanding is too big, but I think he's a big-hearted person. I think if you know the guy and you're personal friends with the guy, you know how probably big-hearted he is and how generous he is. Obviously, with what has been one of the biggest donations to Nebraska University that he made, I just think there's a lot of things just kind of falling on top of Ndamukong Suh right now, and it's really too bad because of how good of a player he is. And I think a thing that kind of maybe helps Ndamukong Suh too is that the sport he plays in, the NFL, where it's a violent sport. So that kind of helps him out. But at the same time, I think he needs to help himself out a little bit. Hire a driver, buddy. I mean, you're getting paid pretty good. I don't think you need to be out driving, especially if you have trouble driving. Hire a driver, and I think that'll save him a lot of headaches.
It's more than this headaches, it's just a negative publicity.
Right.
And like we said, his reputation. Your reputation is something that's very hard to get back once you damage it. And he may have damaged it. And it's just going to be interesting to see how he handles himself from here on out, to see if he can get some of that reputation back.
Yep, I agree. And I hope he does, just for the, like we've both said, he's a great player and came from the University of Nebraska, which we are both fans of. So I hope he gets it back. Well, we're going to take a little break. We're going to get our playoff picture sorted out. What we're going to do is we're going to go through the AFC and go through the NFC and kind of go through the last 5 games of each team's schedule, going maybe 1 or 2 or 3 teams that are in the playoffs, and then kind of the teams that are on the outside looking in that we think have a chance of getting in there. And we're going to go through, pick our winners, see where we're sitting at the end of the season, what records we're at, and then that kind of tells us who our playoff picture is. So this has been Double D Sports Show, and we'll see you in a little bit. All right, welcome back to the Double D Sports Show, coming to you on a Tuesday evening this week. We just got done discussing some of the headlines in the NFL. We're going to jump into our playoff prediction. Just a reminder to check us out on Twitter, DBLD Sports Show. That's with capital D, capital D and then Sports Show, capitalize that. But if you just put in Double D Sports Show, I'm sure it'll pop up. Please feel free to post your comments on our video. You know, we'd love to hear from you guys who watch our video or maybe listen to it, and give us a little bit so we can go back and forth on. But let's get right into it. We're going to start off with the AFC and that playoff picture. Currently, I believe Houston is sitting at the #1 seed with a 10-1 record. Baltimore number 2, New England number 3, Denver 4, Indianapolis 5, and Pittsburgh 6. So, you know, let's start with New England, 8-3. To finish out the season, they got Miami versus Houston versus San Francisco, at Jacksonville, and then finished out versus Miami. So let's just go through these last 5 games, see who we think we got winning. Let's start off with at Miami. Who you got in that game?
New England looks to me like they have the chance to run the table. I think they'll beat Miami twice. They'll beat Jacksonville, and I think they can win one of the 2 with Houston and San Francisco. Both being at home plays to their advantage. I wouldn't be surprised if the Patriots finish 13-3, but for sure I think they'll be a 12-4 team, and I think for sure they beat the Dolphins.
So you got them beating the Dolphins twice. Houston, pick in that game. Houston or New England?
Yeah, right now I think at home, the way the Patriots are playing, I don't see Houston beating the Patriots.
Okay.
San Francisco can come in there and knock them off, but I don't think they'll lose to Houston. But once again, it's a week-to-week league. It can all change overnight. So.
Right. So you got them running the table. That finishes them at 13-3. So we'll leave them at 13-3. Let's move on to the 4th seed in Denver, also 8-3. They finish up with at home against Tampa Bay. They go to Oakland, go to Baltimore, and then finish up with 2 home games against Cleveland and Kansas City. Tampa Bay. Who you got winning that one? Denver versus Tampa Bay.
Tampa Bay is pretty hot, but I don't think they're as hot as Denver. I think Denver can win that game. You know, we look at Oakland. It's at Oakland. It's always going to be a close rivalry game, but I think the Broncos will be just fine. Baltimore, that's going to be a really tough one for them. It's really going to be a test, but I like Denver. I like Denver to run the table as well and then finish with Cleveland and Kansas City, and I like Denver to win the last 5 games.
So we got them running the table at 13-3. I agree with you on them. So we'll have them on 13-3. Move on to the number 5 seed. Surprise to everyone, I think, at the number 5 seed, 7-4 Indianapolis. Last season, they won 2 games, I believe it was, and got their draft pick with Andrew Luck, which brings us back to our point on how important the quarterback is.
Yep.
With Andrew Luck absolutely turning this team around, bringing them in 7-4. They finish the season at Detroit, home versus Tennessee, at Houston, at Kansas City, and then home versus Houston again. A little bit tougher of a schedule for Indy here. What do you think?
We looked at Indy 3 weeks ago, and we talked about them if they won one of their next games, and we saw them win one last week. And you know, I think the Colts are going to be just fine. I think that they'll finish with the 10-6 mark that we predicted in the beginning would be enough. You know, don't quite know. They got 2 games with Houston and then 10 in Detroit. You know, if they drop 2 of those and then can pick up 1, I think Tennessee and Kansas City will be a good enough win. I like the Colts to stay 10-6, and I don't think anyone's going to jump over them. The next team is the 6th seed, is the one that really makes me a little nervous if I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. I don't know if they'll hold on to their spot. It just depends on Roethlisberger. But I think the Colts will make the postseason with 10-6. Rather that be the 5 or 6 seed is still out there to be determined. But I think the Colts will make the playoffs.
So they got at Detroit. I think we both agree that that's probably going to be a loss at Detroit. Versus Tennessee, that's a win. Their first game is at Houston. I think they lose that one. Kansas City is a win, and then I think they beat Houston last game of the season at home because I think Houston may be resting a few guys.
If I'm picking it week by week, you know, I could make a case that they win every game and finish 11-4. But the thing is here, you don't pick it week by week. You know, you pick it as an overall looking at it. Now, overall looking at it, I don't know if I'd say they lose to Detroit. If I'm picking Indy or Detroit, I'm going to pick Detroit or pick Indy to win the game. Just my personal opinion. But I think as an overall,
that's kind of what we
as
want
an
to do
overall, here. As an overall thing, I just think that they'll go 3-2 in the last 5 games and finish 10-6. You know, that's the thing when you look at Tennessee and Kansas City. We could very easily see them go beat Detroit and lose in Arrowhead to Kansas City. It's just up and down league, it's so hard to pick, you know, with all the injuries and stuff. But I think it's a safe bet for the Colts to be playing the postseason this year.
Okay. So they're 10-6. Pittsburgh 6-5. They're sitting at the 6th seed right now, and they're in basically because of their tiebreaker over Cincinnati based on head-to-head win percentage.
Mm-hmm.
They finish up their season at Baltimore, home versus San Diego, at Dallas, home versus Cincinnati and Cleveland. 6-5. They're going to have to win a lot of games. Baltimore's going to be a tough game. I think without Ben Roethlisberger playing, Baltimore would take that game again for a sweep. Versus San Diego, you know, it's a tough one to say if Roethlisberger's still out. But San Diego, I think if Roethlisberger's out, let's just go under the assumption that Roethlisberger's out for that. I don't know what the outlook on Roethlisberger is.
If Roethlisberger's out for the year, we could see Pittsburgh go 6-10.
Right.
We really could. If Roethlisberger came back Sunday against Baltimore, we could see them go 11-5.
Well, what is
that's
that?
the difference he makes. It's pretty good odds they're going to have Charlie Batch next week, but I think the San Diego game, there's a chance Big Ben could be back. I can still see them running 9-7, a 10-6 record, and sneaking in the playoffs. See, they have a game against Cincinnati. They have another game against Cincinnati, so as long as they stay even with the Bengals and beat them, they should be fine to get in the playoffs. Talking about Miami and San Diego and Tennessee, you know, and the Jets, their chances are pretty slim as it is. I think Pittsburgh. I picked Pittsburgh to make the playoffs. I did not pick. I want to reiterate that I did not pick the Indianapolis Colts to make the playoffs. I don't know if anyone did, but I had Pittsburgh in the playoffs to start the year. I'm going to stand by that pick, but there's a lot of teams like the Dolphins at 5-6 maybe could possibly make a run, but the 4-7 teams, I think the ship has sailed there.
Yeah. So. We'll just say 10-6 for Pittsburgh. Cincinnati coming in, they're 6-5. They got a chance to get in depending on what Pittsburgh does. But if we say we got them at 10-6, Cincinnati's got a game against San Diego at San Diego. I think that one's a loss. They play Dallas. I think that one's a loss. I think they get a win against Philadelphia with Roethlisberger back. They play Cincinnati. I think that's a loss, and then a loss against Baltimore to finish out their season. So I'd say they're going to go 1-4 in their last 5 games, 7 up 7-9, and then they're out. Moving into Miami, 5-6, same thing. A lot of things got to go right for them to get in. I think they basically have to win out, and that's not going to happen with a game against New England. I think that's a loss. 2 losses against New England, a loss against San Francisco. I think they can, you know, they lost to Jacksonville this last week.
Yeah. They actually beat Seattle last week. The Dolphins. The Dolphins coming off a win against Seattle, but at home against Jacksonville, it's a division game. It's no easy game. So the Dolphins are gonna have their work cut out for them. Jacksonville and Buffalo. They're another team that could very easily lose out and finish the year 6-10 or 5-11.
5-11. I'm gonna pick them at 6-10. I think they get a win. I'm gonna say against Jacksonville. That could be against Buffalo, but 6-10. So they're on the outside looking in. And like we said, the 4-7 teams, they'd have to win out in just the way we have the top 6 seeds.
Win out and have some
help
happen above them. Yep,
so
absolutely.
That wraps it. That's our playoff picture. So we'd still have Houston let's see. Well, we didn't even really touch on Houston's schedule. If New England and Denver go 13-3, you know, where does that leave Houston? What's Houston's schedule look like? They're 10-1 right now. Last 5 games are against, as I get it pulled up here, Tennessee, New England, 2 against Indy and 1 against Minnesota. I think they can beat Tennessee. I think they'll lose to New England. Indy will split with them, and I think they'll beat Minnesota, so that gives them 1-2. So they'd be 13-3 too. So you'd have 3 teams at 13-3, and then it depends on tiebreaker situations.
Houston would own the tiebreaker. They have beat Denver. And when they play New England, if New England beats them, they would jump them. But I think Houston, you know, I thought Indy would split with them. They still might. It's such a hard thing to predict. You know, I think Houston will hold on to one of them top 2 seeds, in my opinion. And I think that Baltimore is a team that could possibly lose out because Baltimore's still got to play Denver in a couple weeks, and that's coming really down to be a showdown. That could be a 4 at number 2 seed if New England would drop a game and Denver would have a chance to jump over 2 teams. So, you know, there could be a lot of jockeying. I think our top 4 teams in the AFC, Houston, Baltimore, New England, and Denver, will be the final 4 per se, no matter what. Because, you know, Indy's going to make a playoff run. They're going to get in the playoffs. Indy at Denver, Peyton Manning, Andrew Luck. I'm still taking Manning. Same thing with Pittsburgh, New England. I know it's Big Ben's there and he's good in the playoffs, but I'm still going to take Tom Brady. I think our top 4 will be solid. I don't think we'll see a wild card Super Bowl run out of the AFC. NFC's a different story, but the AFC, I like the way it's set up right now.
Right, and I think Indy can make some noise in the playoffs if they don't get matched up against Denver that first week. If they're playing anybody else that first week, I think they can maybe win a game in the playoffs.
Right, they might be able to go into, you know, Pittsburgh, if Pittsburgh make a push. It's just all looking to me. You know, we saw Indy already play New England, and that didn't turn out so well for them. Right. But I just have to disagree there. I think Indy, you know, it's a great story for them to make the playoffs, but I think it's going to end right there.
Right. Well, you brought up the NFC. I think we both agree that our top 3 teams, which are your 3 division winners of the NFC South, NFC West, and NFC North, with Atlanta 1, San Francisco 2, and Chicago 3, are pretty much safe.
Yeah, you know, that's debatable. I think I still think the Packers got the NFC North. I'm still hanging my hat on them just because Chicago, the inconsistency. You know, we'll have to see how Cutler does. But Green Bay, beside this last game, they were pretty hot too, and they still play Chicago one more time. Don't forget that.
Right.
And that game, if they beat the Bears, they will have the tiebreak, sweeping them in the regular season. So, you know, it's a lot's going to happen, but I'm going to stand by I picked Green Bay to win the North at the beginning of the year. I'm going to stand by that pick and stay by them. But I think Green Bay or Chicago, they'll both make the playoffs regardless. It'll just depend on where the games play.
Okay. So we got New York Giants. They're currently in as NFC East champions. That'll probably stand, I think, in the NFC East.
I think that's pretty safe.
They finish up their season at Washington, home versus New Orleans, at Atlanta, at Baltimore, at Philly. We got 3 games in a row right there that are pretty tough games.
Four, I would say, because I think Washington's going to
run their
money.
I think they get a win against Washington. New Orleans is going to be a tough one. I think New Orleans comes out and beats them. Atlanta, I think they get a loss to Atlanta, and I think they get a loss to Baltimore. And then they get to win the final game of the season. I'm going to pick them 2-5, and they're going to finish 9-7, or 2-3, I guess, for the last 5 games. And they're going to finish 9-7.
But 9-7 should be good enough to win that division,
right?
Especially if they beat the Redskins. If they beat the Redskins, that's putting Redskins already at 7 losses and having to win their final 4.
Yep.
You know,
and we'll get to them.
If the Giants can knock off Washington next Monday night, they pretty much lock the division up. However, if they lose to the Redskins next Monday night, then there's a 1-game difference, and we're going to have a horse race to the end.
Yep. Moving into Green Bay, they're currently at the 5 seed. You know, could be in as a wild card, or could be in as the NFC North Championship. They finished their schedule: home versus Minnesota, home versus Detroit, at Chicago, home versus Tennessee, and then at Minnesota. It's really too bad for us Vikings fans, because the last 2 weeks we've had the Chicago Bears, who came off a butt kicking and came out to prove something, and now we got to take on Green Bay, who came off a butt kicking.
That's a good point to make. That does make a difference.
I think they're gonna get a win against Minnesota. Unfortunately, I think they get a win against Detroit. I think Chicago beats them at, when they go to Chicago. I think they beat them. I think Tennessee, they get a win, and I'm gonna go out on a limb and say they get a loss against Minnesota. So they finish the season 3-2. That puts them at 10-6, which still puts them in the playoffs. I think as a wild card. But just kind of see how these other ones fit.
If you're picking them to beat the Vikings, or to lose to the Vikings in the Metrodome last game of the year, I guess I could see Chicago beating the Packers and the Green Bay 11-5. But like I said, it's such a hard thing to predict. We don't know about injuries.
Right.
If the Packers show up like they did Sunday night, they could go 7-9.
Right.
If they show up like we saw in the previous 5 games, we could see them go 12-4. It's all just depends on what Green Bay team shows up.
Yeah, but I mean, just for this week's conversation, that's kind of how I got them. Let's move on to Seattle. Probably the big surprise in the NFC as far as getting into the playoffs was Seattle under Russell Wilson. they finish up their season at Chicago, home against Arizona, at Buffalo, and then 2 home games to finish off the season. One against San Francisco, one against St. Louis. I'm going to say they get a loss against Chicago. Cutler's playing good. They had a good showing last week. Not to take anything away from Seattle, I think it's going to be a great game, but I think Chicago edges them out just because of their great defense.
Yeah.
They get a win against Arizona. They get a win against Buffalo. Even though they might be going into Buffalo playing them in bad weather, that could be a little bit of a determination too if it's cold outside, I think they get a loss against San Francisco, and I think they get a win against St. Louis. So they're going to finish their season 9-7. Not enough to win that division, but they'd have a tiebreaker over Tampa Bay still, and that would get them in, into the playoffs as a wild card.
I guess if I had to pick right now, if I'm picking it right now, I think that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to make that push, but I also think that New Orleans Saints have a chance. We talk about New Orleans.
That's true. We'll get to them.
They're not on the sheet. They're down here 5-6, but Seattle. I don't know if they got enough this year to get in the playoffs. We saw them a couple years ago make it on a division winner. Last year, San Francisco made it. But I think you're right. I think 9-7 is a pretty good bet for the Seahawks.
Yep. Well, let's move into Tampa Bay. They got a game at Denver, home versus Philly, at New Orleans versus St. Louis, and at Atlanta. Kind of a tougher schedule. Mm-hmm. I'm going to say they lose to Denver. They get a win against Philly, lose to New Orleans, get a win against St. Louis, and then I think they get a win against Atlanta just because I think Atlanta's going to be resting their guy. They're not going to be playing a full game. Mm-hmm. So that finishes them up 9-7. Tied with Seattle. So Seattle would have the tiebreaker.
Okay. Seattle and Tampa Bay haven't played, but
it says based on win percentage in conference games.
Conference game win percentage is a tiebreaker. Okay, but is that going to change? That's what I'm wondering, how your tiebreaker is going to work, where the losses come from. Because if Tampa Bay loses all these games to the AFC and Seattle loses more games to the NFC, see what I'm saying? That might jockey that around a little bit.
Well, the one game they have the same in their last 5 games would be St. Louis. And I think we both think that Tampa Bay and Seattle...
Well, it goes by conference win percentage. So
oh, okay.
So, basically, Seattle loses to Chicago and San Francisco. If they only lose to New Orleans, Tampa Bay may jump them. I'm not sure what it is, but it's all kind of...
Well, I mean, okay, so you're saying on an AFC, their win
AFC
percentage
loss
against their...
won't affect them just because it's a conference win percentage is a
Oh, so
tiebreaker.
NFC conference win percentage. Okay,
Yep.
all right. Minnesota, they're on the outside looking in. They're currently the 8th seed. They're 6-5. They got a bear of a schedule to finish up the season. They got to go to Green Bay, as I said earlier, a week after Green Bay getting their butts kicked. Then they got to play Chicago again, 2 weeks off of playing, getting their butt kicked by Chicago. They go to St. Louis, go to Houston, and then finish up at home versus Green Bay. I think they get a loss this next week against Green Bay, loss against Chicago. They can beat St. Louis, I think. They'll lose to Houston, and then I think they can beat Green Bay that last week of the season. For an 8-8 record, which is good for Minnesota after the season they had last year. Big question there is it enough to give Leslie Frazier his job back for next year? I hope so. I like Leslie Frazier. I think the Minnesota Vikings are moving in the right direction. Just a few missing pieces on the O-line. Moving into Washington, their final 5 games: home versus New York, home versus Baltimore, 2 road games against Cleveland and Philly, and then home against Dallas. Go against there. I think earlier we picked New York to beat Washington. I think they get a loss against Baltimore, beat Cleveland, beat Philly, and then home versus Dallas. Big game there. They come into this game 7-8. A win there. I think they beat Dallas, finish 8-8. Not enough to get in the playoffs. New Orleans, pull up their schedule. At Atlanta, at New York, home versus Tampa Bay, at Dallas, and home versus Carolina. Kind of a tough schedule there too.
Absolutely.
I think they get a loss. I think Atlanta comes in and gets revenge on them. Atlanta go win a loss against Atlanta. I went through the New York Giants schedule earlier. I think I think New Orleans will beat the Giants. Tampa Bay. Man, I think that's a tough game. I think they get a win against Tampa Bay. I'm going to say they get a win against Dallas and get a win against Carolina.
9-7.
So they finish 9-7.
Yep.
And then again it comes down to a tiebreaker between them, Tampa Bay and Seattle.
It's going to really come down to that. The only thing I could see is if Seattle or Tampa Bay could not drop one game. We talked about them dropping just to get a 10-6 record. Because New Orleans sitting at 5-6 with 5 games left. If they go 9-7, I think they'll be very fortunate, and that's where I see them finishing. And I wanted to say see the Saints make the playoffs, but I just don't know if they will. I think my pick is Tampa Bay as that 6th seed if we figure Green Bay holds on to 5. But it'll all be interesting because the tiebreakers will be a big difference in that.
Yep. Well, it's going to be an interesting last 5 weeks. A lot of movement can be made in the NFC, just depending on how the games play out. You never know. Minnesota might get hot. Not saying they're going to, but they could get hot.
Yep. Yes. Never will know.
New Orleans could jump in there if Green Bay kind of falters and Seattle kind of falters their last 5 games. So a lot of movement in the NFC I think we see coming on. As they sit right now, I think it looks pretty good. Seattle in, Tampa Bay out. New Orleans out, unfortunately, just because of their bad start. Kind of a tough deal there.
Yep.
So let's get to our top 5 NFL teams for this week.
Our weekly top 5.
Our weekly top 5.
Let's do it.
Starting off, I don't think I had these guys in my top 5 last week, but I'll put them in at number 5, San Francisco. Just because of what their defense has done this last couple weeks. Colin Kaepernick coming in and playing great. I think they got a great system in San Francisco, Jim Harbaugh, and they're my number 5 team.
I have actually on the Atlanta Falcons. I'm going to put it number 5. Atlanta, we saw them winning all these close games. I'm not completely sold on them, and I had to have them up there when they were undefeated, and had to have them up there when they were, playing good. But then they lose to the Saints. They won a close one, 2 in a row against the Buccaneers this week and the Cardinals last week. I'm dropping Atlanta, and I'm going to keep saying it. Atlanta, you have to run the football better. 28th in the league at 88.3 yards a game, and defensively 22nd in the league, giving up over 100 yards every single game. That is not going to bode well. Now they passed really well, 2nd in the league, and they cover the pass pretty well at 13th. But they have to run the ball better and stop the run better. And until they do that, they are not a Super Bowl team.
Yeah, and I didn't have Atlanta that much higher. I had them at number 4. And I think the only reason I had them above San Francisco, is because of their record and the eye test. I think if the head-to-head match, I think Atlanta would come out on top of that one in a close game. But they did run the ball. A little bit better this last week. Michael Turner hit some holes, and he had a good rushing game. Obviously not his best, but he ended up with 13 carries for 17 yards. I guess not as good as I thought, but Rodgers, their other young guy, had 10 carries for 49 yards. But you're absolutely right. They got to get to that rushing game. That's going to be that's going to open up so many options for Matt Ryan.
Absolutely.
You're number 4.
Number 4, I get the 49ers. Ever since that 26-3 smacking the Giants handed down on them, we saw them play 4 very good football games. They won 13-6 against Seattle, blowout 24-3 against Arizona. They tied with the Rams, and they, smoked the Bears 32-7 in Monday Night Football, and 31-21 win over the Saints. That tie versus the Rams doesn't look very good, but they are playing good football, and they're back. They run the football really well, and they play good defense. 2nd in passing and 4th in rush defense. So I think that the 49ers are the 4th best team in the NFL right now, and I think we both can agree. We think that the AFC has the 3 best teams in the National Football League to this day.
Yep, I got Houston at number 3, and like you said, they're one of the top 3 teams, and they're not far off from my top 2. But I just think if Houston were to play my top two teams, they would lose, and that's why I have them at number 3.
I still stick with. Actually, I'm sliding down a little bit. I have the Denver Broncos at number 3, just because, it was a rivalry game, but they didn't do what I thought they should have done to the Kansas City Chiefs. Kansas City Chiefs gave them, their offense was absolutely stagnant. I mean, we look at this game, and Denver just, I don't know if they didn't come to play or what it was, but they couldn't move the ball until the end of the game. I mean, 285 yards passing, 2 touchdowns for Manning, and they ran the ball pretty effectively, but they got the ball, they got stops. Let's look at the total yards. Kansas City, 264 yards. They moved the ball in Denver. They just couldn't finish. Denver was very fortunate to get out of there with the win.
Yeah, they were very fortunate to get out of there with the win, but just having Peyton Manning on your team and the defense they have, I know they can play better than that. They only gave up 9 points, but it seemed to me that Kansas City, it was the time of possession was the big thing. They didn't get them off the field on a couple third down plays, but the defense they have and Peyton Manning, their offense is going to be able to put up more than 17 points a game. I think it's just tough to kind of come into Kansas City and play sometimes. I think Kansas City just shows
it's a good
up.
place to play. They have good fan base, and yep, you're exactly right there.
And I have Denver at number 2 simply for the fact that I think they're the second best team in the NFL with Peyton Manning and their defense.
And we both agree, I think, that we have the New England Patriots again as the number 1 team in the NFL. And it's funny because they started here the first couple weeks, then they kind of went away, and now they're back, and they're back as good as ever.
Yeah.
The New England Patriots are absolutely the team everyone has to be looking at. They are getting as hot as they can get at the right time in the year. The number 1 offense in the league. Again, the thing is, can they win games against Peyton Manning? Can they win games against Matt Schaub? Against teams with prolific pass games?
Right.
Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers. If those teams make the Super Bowl, it's the Patriots really struggle guarding the pass, and other than that, they're a pretty good defense. So if you can go out and throw the ball around them, you're going to be able to beat them. But we see the Patriots just hammering smackdown to team. 49 points 1 week against the Jets, and 59 the week before against the Colts,
right.
and 34 the week before against Buffalo, 45 against St. Louis.
Yep.
We saw them score 52 against Buffalo earlier in the year. This team is a terrific offense, and you better watch out because Tom Brady's got a chip on his shoulder. He's lost now 2 Super Bowls,
right.
Back to back, basically. It's over a span of 5 years, but 2 in a row since he's won one.
Right.
He has to be hungry for number 4.
You're absolutely right, and the thing you said is they're putting up points, and they put up 37 and 59 the 2 weeks before, 59 with Gronkowski in, and Gronkowski going down, and they still put up 49 points. So that just shows you how many weapons they have on offense.
Absolutely.
And once they get Gronkowski back, you better look out because they might put up 69 points.
Watch out for
79
these
points.
guys.
Yep, absolutely. Well, that wraps it up for the NFL this week. We're going to take a little break. When we come back, we're going to talk college football, conference championship games this Saturday, and BCS bowl games.
Double D Sports Show.
All right, we're back. Double D Sports Show. Covered a lot of things in the NFL. We're going to mainly focus on NFL this week. A lot of big stuff going on in the NFL that we touched on. College football coming up. Kind of seems to be the focus of the sports world right now. So we're going to get into college football right now. BCS standings this week. Notre Dame number 1, Alabama 2, Georgia 3, Florida, Oregon, K-State, LSU, Stanford, Texas A&M, and South Carolina. Wrap up your top 10. That's kind of the way they're going to sit. And when they come time for bowl games, maybe a little bit of switching there between Georgia and Alabama, depending how the SEC championship game goes. K-State might fall a little bit if they lose to Texas in the Big 12 championship game. Stanford, they play their Pac-12 championship game against UCLA this Saturday. So a lot of big games this weekend. Let's kind of jump into it. Let's start with the big one, SEC championship game, Alabama, Georgia. Who you got?
This is one that I got to pick Alabama. Georgia, we talk every year. Every year we make a case, people make cases that Georgia's ready to upseat the Alabama Crimson Tide. They're ready to upseat the Florida Gators. Georgia just hasn't done it. We saw Georgia, their only loss this year was Texas A&M, which turns out to be a pretty good loss now. We saw Alabama's only loss this year, Texas A&M. and we see them playing the same teams. So it's interesting that they're very similar teams. One thing I guess I think with you have to look at with Alabama is just excuse me, I was looking at the wrong thing there. Georgia's only loss was to South Carolina earlier in the year. 35-7. They got smoked by the Gamecocks, but we saw them roll over the rest of their schedule. I just really think Alabama's going to take this game. Alabama's defense is so good, giving up 9.3 points a game. They can move the football. If you look at the stats, Alabama blows them away on paper. Funny thing is, though, they do have to go out there and play the game. So maybe Georgia can motivate themselves enough to win it. I don't see it. I see Alabama winning and cruising on to play Notre Dame in the national championship game.
I'm going to disagree with you. I don't think anybody in the nation is giving Georgia a chance, except for myself and Colin Cowherd, and I believe Brad Edwards is giving him a chance. No, I take that back. Mark Schlabach is giving Georgia a chance. I just think Alabama is not as good as everybody thinks. I mean, I think you got Alabama's schedule up there.
Well, I mean, we saw absolutely we saw two close games all year. It's hard to see how they play in a close game. We saw them beat LSU one week and lose to Texas A&M the next.
Right, but that's what I mean. They haven't really played anybody besides Michigan at the beginning of the year. The two other close games they had were against Texas A&M, which they lost, and LSU, which they could have very easily lost. They were losing with a minute to go.
Yep.
So that's why I'm just not sold on Alabama. I think Georgia has the offense that can move the ball against this Alabama defense. We talked last year about Alabama's defense. That was a good Alabama defense. I don't think this year's defense is as good as last year's defense that won in the national championship. So, Texas A&M had success against them, so I think Georgia's going to have success against them.
Georgia may have success against them. The only thing I can point out is if you're going to argue that Alabama hasn't played the tough teams, what does Georgia play? Some play Florida, and South Carolina lost to South Carolina, but South Carolina has really reeled backwards since that game. Tennessee, they won by Tennessee by a touchdown. I don't think the Volunteers are anything to be bragging about either. So I agree that they're both. I agree with you that Alabama is not as good as they usually are, but I don't know if Georgia's good enough. It's gonna be a game, I feel, where it's like a 31-20 type game. I don't think it'll be overly high scoring, but I don't think it'll be a complete defensive battle.
No.
That's my prediction. I think Alabama goes on. Pick Alabama to beat Oregon in the beginning of the season in a national championship game. Obviously, that's not going to come true because Notre Dame is sitting here waiting, but I think Alabama will go on and play Notre Dame in the national title game.
Okay, you got Alabama, Notre Dame. I got Georgia, Notre Dame for the national championship game. Let's move on to the Big Ten championship game. Nebraska, Wisconsin, rematch from an earlier game this year where Wisconsin got up on them big in the first half. Nebraska came storming back in the second half to win that game. Probably gave them, helped them save their season on getting into the Big Ten championship.
Yep.
What's your pick?
Exactly right. I
think I know what your pick is.
It was the first Big Ten game of the season that Nebraska nearly lost and ended up winning. And it's interesting that Nebraska would be playing Ohio State or Penn State in any other year because Wisconsin is the third team. Nebraska's got to look at the way Wisconsin's played. They've lost to Michigan State. They've lost to Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon State. And Wisconsin's got a lot of losses. They're hungry, sitting here at 7-5, to think they can go 8-5 and get in a BCS game. And Nebraska, this would be huge if they could get to the Rose Bowl and play Stanford. This would be massive for the Cornhuskers to get recruits, to get people interested in the program again. We saw Nebraska lose to UCLA. If UCLA wins against Stanford, we could see UCLA come back and play Nebraska in a rematch of that earlier game.
Yep.
And you know what? Stanford, it's a rematch of a week before where UCLA lost 35-17, and then they got to turn around and play them again 6 days later. Kind of crazy how that all worked out.
Yep.
But you look at this, and I think Stanford will win, so we won't see that rematch. But that loss to UCLA looks a lot better now for the Cornhuskers.
Absolutely.
And the loss to Ohio State, who finished the year 12-0 and hardly any close games at all.
Right.
That looks like a good loss too. Nebraska's a very, very good two-loss teams. They've lost 2 games, one in blowout fashion and one close. But you know what? we're sitting there with a team in the national championship game that's going to have one loss. So having one loss wouldn't be that bad. They should have beat UCLA, and they got smoked by Ohio State, but they're a very good 2-loss team.
Absolutely, they are a very good 2-loss team. And you talk about the blowout to Ohio State. Ohio State, Colin Cowherd tweeted earlier this week, Ohio State is a tattoo shop, a tattoo owner away from being in a national championship game against Notre Dame.
It's funny he says that now, but the thing is, this guy, he's a Big Ten hater all year.
Oh yeah, he's an SEC homer. Yeah.
He's a Big Ten hater all year, and then he wants to give credit to Ohio State for being 12-0. Oh, the Big Ten is not down. The Big Ten is not a bad conference.
No.
We have Ohio State, who would probably be ranked #1 in the BCS.
Yep.
They would probably be ranked 1 with Notre Dame too. I think that's a safe bet. We have Ohio State there, Nebraska. Okay, you can say that's the only rankings. We have potential to have 2 BCS teams if Ohio State was eligible.
Okay? Well, yeah, and like you said, Penn State would be playing for a chance at a Big
BCS
Ten,
game.
at a BCS game, and think about this. You and I always talk that grass ain't always greener on the other side, is it, Silas Red? The team you left to go play for USC has more wins than your USC Trojans do.
Yep.
So I mean, Penn State, Ohio State, Nebraska, just the Big Ten conference in general, I think is the best conference in national or in the NCAA football. And
I don't know if I'll go that far, but I'll say that they're right there. If you talk about SEC, Pac-12, I think you have to put Big Ten in that conversation.
Yep.
I think you just have to.
Well, let's move on to the Pac-12 championship. K-State versus Texas. K-State needs to win this game, I think, to redeem their season. I think they got to get the Big 12 championship game, and
it's
does
actually,
that puts them in a BCS bowl game, correct?
Kansas State's actually it's not really a Big 12 championship game. They play Texas. If they win, they have the tiebreak, and if they lose, Oklahoma would have to lose for Kansas State to go. So basically,
it's for the Big 12 championship. I mean,
Oklahoma is the other team that would go to the Big 12 title game. Oklahoma plays TCU. If Oklahoma loses to TCU, Kansas State's in. If Oklahoma beats TCU and Kansas State loses to Texas, then Oklahoma's win. Basically, Oklahoma has to win and Kansas State lose, or Kansas State has to win or Oklahoma lose.
Okay.
That's how it works.
Okay.
But I think Kansas State's. I would pick Kansas State to beat Texas. I picked them to beat Texas in the beginning. I thought that they'd go undefeated. I really thought they would, and they didn't. But the Kansas State Wildcats, they will win this game.
They win that game, and they
will go on to probably the Fiesta Bowl. It's a team that
Yep.
usually takes the Big 12, and they'll probably play an at-large team. Most likely, probably Oregon. Might see Florida go in there, but Florida's probably going to the Sugar if the SEC champion is going to the national title. So it's all this a bunch of jockeying, but there's a lot of projection out there. I think Kansas State wins the Big 12 and cements themselves in the Fiesta Bowl.
Okay. Well, we touched on it earlier on our national championship predictions. You said Notre Dame, Alabama. I said Notre Dame, Georgia. In my matchup, Notre Dame, Georgia, I think Notre Dame has a chance to beat Georgia and go on be the BCS national championship, national champions. And you got Notre Dame and Alabama, and I think I know which way you're leaning on this one.
I want Notre Dame to win this game in the worst possible way, but I just don't see it happening. I think that once Alabama gets in there against Notre Dame, their defense will be too much. Notre Dame has a terrific defense in themselves, but I think the quality of competition week in and week out was harder for Alabama along the way, preparing them for this game. And I take the Crimson Tide. If I'm a betting man, I'm taking the Crimson Tide. As sitting there watching the game cheering, I'm going for the Irish.
One thing I want to touch on that is if Alabama does go on and win the SEC championship and get into that national championship game, there's going to be about a 4-week break there before they face off for the national championship game. And I've heard a lot of people say it. You give Nick Saban 4 weeks to prepare for a team, and you're going to have a tough time beating Alabama.
Yep.
Well, let me refresh your memory. Colin Cowherd refreshed mine earlier this week. Nick Saban had 4 weeks to prepare for Utah for a bowl game. And how did that turn out? Utah ended up beating Alabama. So
I think what they're referring to is a game of this magnitude. It's easy to see to have the Utah Utes coming into the Sugar Bowl and maybe not quite prepare like he should or overlook it. But when you see him get ready for national championship games, this guy has 2 of them already.
Right.
He's 2 for 2 in Alabama, and he's 3 for 3 if you count his one with LSU. So this guy does know how to prepare a
Right.
team. I would be very, very, very scared of the Alabama Crimson Tide if I'm the Notre Dame Irish. I'd be definitely a Georgia Bulldog fan this weekend. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Right, and I mean you got to look at the other side too with Notre Dame and Chip Kelly,
Brian Kelly.
or
Yep.
Brian
Yep.
Kelly. Sorry,
Yep.
Brian Kelly. This guy's an offensive guru, I think, and I think if anybody has a chance of going up against that Alabama defense and maybe scheming an offense to maybe have some success against Alabama, I'm not going to say they're going to dominate them, but have some success.
I think
Brian Kelly's the guy to do it.
Brian Kelly, I think, is number 2. I got another Kelly that I picked for number 1 from Oregon. I think if you're talking offense, that's where you got to go. But I do see your point.
Right.
I think Notre Dame, it'll be a good football game, but I think the Irish will come out on top. Or, excuse me, the Crimson Tide will come out on top.
Let's move on to the other BCS game we touched on a little bit earlier, the Tostitos Fiesta Bowl. K-State versus Oregon. This could have been a potential national championship game if the cards would have fell in their favor 2 weeks ago, but they didn't. But we're going to get to see them match up in the Tostitos Fiesta Bowl maybe. K-State, Oregon. High-powered offensive game, I think. I don't think you see a lot of defensive here. I think I'm going to pick Oregon to go on and win this game against K-State.
Yep, absolutely. The Oregon Ducks will win this game. I think they win it with ease. I could see them winning by a couple touchdowns just because of their offense.
Yep. Next one, All-State Sugar Bowl, another BCS bowl game. Oklahoma versus Florida. You know, this is kind of a rematch of olds per se. You know, we've seen both of these guys in national championship games. I don't know if they've ever faced off in a national championship game.
Both these teams, Florida with 1 loss and Oklahoma with 2 losses, they actually did. Florida, one of Tim Tebow's national title games was defeating the Oklahoma Sooners for a national title. Oklahoma's going to be kind of on the back burner. We kind of forget about them, but they're relevant again. And I think that they can come out and play well, but I think that the Gators are pretty tough. They're riding high. You know, they've won a lot in a row. The Gators, had Notre Dame lost, the Florida Gators are probably waiting for Alabama or Georgia in the national title game.
Absolutely.
So Florida's absolutely a good team, and I'd be picking the Gators in this game.
Next one, the Discover Orange Bowl, BCS bowl game, Florida State. Tough loss against Florida. You talked about if Florida State would have won that, they might have jumped up and been in a higher BCS bowl game, but they're going to take on the Rutgers. Personally, I haven't heard much of the Rutgers this year, so I'm taking Florida State.
You know, Rutgers actually, believe it or not, we talked about Louisville was undefeated for a while, but Rutgers is actually where they're ranked is not even in the BCS standing as far as I can see on my screen here. So that's kind of like, you know, you're kind of looking at it and thinking, nah, maybe this is too easy. But even at that, Florida State with 2 losses, this game's going to kind of be looked at like, does it really matter? You know, they're sitting 9-2 overall. Rutgers Scarlet Knights,
So are they a conference champion? Is that how they got it?
Big East
Conference champion? Okay.
Big East Conference championship, and Rutgers is, they're unranked. No Big East team is ranked right now.
Right.
So it's kind of a...
They get in on the conference championship.
They get in on the conference championship, and I think the Seminoles will have their way with them.
Yep. And finally, probably besides the national championship game, this is going to be my favorite BCS game to watch. Nebraska versus Stanford for the Rose Bowl. Rose Bowl, I think, is probably the second biggest bowl game behind the national championship game. You got the Big Ten versus the Pac-12, Nebraska versus Stanford. I'm taking Nebraska all the way.
You know, this is what Tom Osborne said when Nebraska switched over to the Big Ten. He said, you know, our goal is to win national championships, but if we can't reach that goal, we want to win Rose Bowls.
Yep.
And now they get a chance in their second season in the Big Ten to go to the Rose Bowl and play the Stanford Cardinal, assuming Stanford beats UCLA. I would actually like to see UCLA knock off Stanford and see a rematch.
Yeah.
I think that'd be very good for the Cornhusker Nation to go out. You know, Bo Pelini, I think, saved his job this year.
Yeah.
He went 10-2, and this is assuming Nebraska still has to beat Wisconsin, but Bo Pelini could finish the year 12-2. They could be climbing in these rankings. You could see Nebraska finish in a top 5 in the BCS standings when it's all said and done. Maybe not a national champion, but in the top 5, that'd be pretty impressive for them. And I agree with you. I think Nebraska can beat Stanford. And we see them beat Stanford, we're going to be looking at them as teams that is back where they should be. Back playing at the quality of being able to beat Notre Dame, who played for a national title.
Right.
Because Stanford played with them.
Yep.
You know, you look at it like that, and that's good to see teams like Nebraska, teams like Stanford, teams like Notre Dame back in the in the national stage that playing for these big teams.
Yeah, absolutely, and I agree with you all the way on Bo Pelini saving his job, especially after Tom Osborne stepping down as AD. You know, if he doesn't finish the season the way we predict him to finish the season, you might see him gone with a new AD.
Coach Pelini could actually lose this game against Wisconsin and go into you know, he'd still get a good bowl game at 10-3 and lose that in 10-4, and he probably still saved his job. But just the fact that he has all this ability now to finish 12-2 as a Rose Bowl champion, if they win 2 more games, that's huge in his job security.
Right, and he's got a great recruiting class coming in next year. I know they got a top 10 quarterback coming in. I believe he was on Trent Dilfer's show, Elite 11. He finished in the top 11 quarterbacks on that show.
Right.
So, you know, he's a good young quarterback coming in, take the place of all-conference player Martinez.
Yep, all Big Ten.
All Big Ten conference, player Tony Martinez.
And Taylor's actually a junior. We'll have him back for 1 more season.
Right, so he gets a little bit, you know, this guy coming in, this freshman,
it's a little
redshirted maybe, a growing period for him, absolutely.
That'd be great. So.
Well, we touched on a lot today. We hope you enjoyed the show. A lot of NFL news, a lot of college football. Just a great time in the year for sports.
Yep.
A lot happened. Just, you know, touch on a little bit of things. The MLB, the Hall of Fame ballots. We might touch on this a little bit next week with Bonds, McGuire, and Clemens. That's good conversation. NBA getting fired up here, and NCAA basketball. You got the Big Ten ACC Challenge tonight. It's the start of Jimmy V Week, so we kind of want to remind you guys to check that out. Check out the Jimmy V Foundation. You know, any donation is help to them. It's for their cancer research. It helps fund their operations. I know ESPN today made the announcement that they're going to donate $1 million to the Jimmy V Foundation. They do a great things there at the Jimmy V Foundation. I'm personally a donor to the Jimmy V Foundation. If you haven't ever heard Jimmy Valvano's speech at the ESPYs, you need to listen to it. It's probably the best speech I've ever heard. Right up there with Lou Gehrig as far as emotional and
for sure the most motivational thing you'll ever listen to, at least in the field of sports.
Right, exactly. So, you know, if you didn't get a chance to watch it, I think they aired it at 7 o'clock. And so if you missed it there, YouTube it. I guarantee you can find it out there on YouTube after you check out our show, Double D Sports Show. Once again, we encourage you guys to check us out on Twitter. Post your comments on our video, and we enjoy having you here, and we hope you enjoyed our show, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
This is Double D Sports Show.